This presentation looks at the issue of replacing and funding Orkney's inter-Isles ferries. It was originally presented to the S&P Orkney branch on the 2nd of March. The presentation covers the following aspects. First of all, replacement of ferries. It asks the question, what type of ferries? The funding of ferries, how much will it cost? And then how could ferries be financed? This, of course, has been a long-standing issue for Orkney. New ferries have been considered for well over 10 years, but no real action seems to have been taken yet. So this presentation perhaps outlines some of the key issues that need to be addressed for that. The reality at the moment, as most of us are well aware, is we have a fleet in Orkney that is largely outdated. The ages are in some cases over 30 years and badly need replaced. In some countries, these vessels of that age would be illegal and need to be replaced by law. They need replaced, therefore, as soon as possible. There are issues to do with safety, environment, reliability, lack of capacity, particularly at peak periods, lost revenue when ships can't take all the demand required. And really, the ferry services should be a reflection of the competitiveness of the islands that they serve. Therefore, at the moment, we might say the ferry services need to be improved to benefit the islands themselves. So the two main design options for replacing ferries are either monohulls or catamarans. The council seem to be looking particularly at monohulls rather than catamarans, although a lot of my research has been with both types, and the catamaran quite often is a superior option, as we can see with Pentland Ferries. Looking at the two different sizes in Orkney, the main sizes are 35-metre length for the smaller vessels, serving Shappensea, Rousey, and the larger vessels sailing to the outer North Isles, and the other vessel, of course, is the Hoy Head. So there's two different sizes, mainly about 35-metre 16-car capacity and 50-metre, the bigger vessels handling about 28 cars. If we compare these with catamarans, we can see that the smaller vessel, the 35-metre length vessel, can carry about 30 cars. That's about twice the capacity, and the same with the catamaran on the bigger length. 50-metre length of the catamaran is a capacity of 50 cars. So the catamarans carry twice as many cars as the monohull for the same length of ship. The reason for this is quite simply that the monohull has a much narrower deck and much wider side casings as well, which take up a lot more capacity and give extra weight on the vessel. So you can see here the slides showing quite a narrow deck on the monohulls, and that's the explanation, the main explanation why they don't carry many cars. Whereas the catamaran, with a much wider platform on two hulls, carries 6 or 7 vehicles wide and twice the capacity. That's the 50-metre vessel here, and the 35-metre catamaran here, which has a similar kind of beam and similar kind of deck capacity. If we look at a summary of the two options here, on the top is the monohulls, on the bottom of the table is the catamarans. The top shows that the average age at the current fleet is about 31 years, average speed 12 knots. The total passenger capacity of the whole fleet is 861, and the total car capacity is 121 cars. A move towards similar length catamarans would almost double the car capacity to 240, would increase the passenger capacity by 30% to over 1,000, and would also increase the speed from 12 to about 14 knots. Catamarans usually have much less resistance than monohulls, and for the same power can give you an extra couple of knots, which is a big benefit, as well as carrying twice the cars for the same power. So there's a big environmental advantage to move towards catamarans. If we look at costs, here on the left-hand side is the monohulls, on the right-hand side is the catamarans. If we were replacing 6 vessels, 3 35-metre monohulls and 3 50-metre monohulls for a like-for-like replacement. The cost of the monohulls would be about £108 million. This is an estimated figure based on shipyard data and recent orders. That's a car capacity of about 132 cars, so it's a cost per car space of almost £1 million. The Catamarans, if we were replacing the fleet with Catamarans, 3 35-metre vessels and 3 50-metre boats, the Catamarans are considerably cheaper than the monohulls, about half the price, £60 million for the 6 vessels. And this is a price obtained from a catamaran designer and builder in Asia. For these vessels would provide almost twice as many car spaces, 240 in total, and that gives you a capital cost per car space on the ships of £250,000. So it's about a third of what the monohulls are per car space. So a big benefit in terms of capital cost as well as carrying capacity. If we were to look at funding, this is just an indicative idea of funding with relatively high interest rate. But if we took on the top is the Catamarans this time, the bottom is the monohulls. So the loan, 100% loan of £60 million for the Catamarans taken over 25 years would result in an annual repayment of £3.8 million. The similar loan for replacement of monohulls would be about £7 million, so almost double the capital cost based on a 25-year loan, which government has been able to do for CalMac. So that's assuming a government loan, really. If we were looking at a ship lease from the builders and the operators, a ship lease over 15 years, again, fairly high interest rate here, just as an idea. The annual repayment for the monohulls at 108 million cost would be about £9.6 million per annum, whereas the Catamarans would be about half this at £5 million per annum. So all in all, the Catamarans can be obtained for much less than the monohulls. This just gives some idea of what the options are for funding. Obviously, a great option for Orkney would be 100% Scottish Government funding if it was available. The other option here is 100% Orkney Islands Council funding. There is also the possibility here of joint funding between both governments, Scottish Government and local government. And that was, I think, the approach taken in the replacement of the passenger vessel recently, obtained from Norway. There is a combination of possibility of grants and loans, which might reduce the annual figure down quite a lot. There's also possibility of a contribution from the OIC Oil Wealth Fund. We also have in Scotland the new Scottish National Investment Bank, which is tasked with making investments in this kind of infrastructure, which might be an option. And a final option is always, where public services are tendered anyway, is for a private operator to come in and operate the service. But the services within Orkney, there's no plan to tender them. So somehow or other, the funding has to come from this kind of mix. And possibly on balance, given the recent joint approach to I think it's the Papua Westry passenger vessel obtained from Norway, perhaps a joint approach from Scottish Government and Orkney Council could be the best option. Whatever vessels are selected, monohulls or catamarans, the idea is obviously to improve the onboard experience for passengers considerably, to make viewing areas much more attractive, and just to make the general experience much more comfortable. So there's different options for improving the seating arrangements. Whatever vessels decided, monohulls or catamarans, a range of tailored designs for ramps can be introduced for these, using the existing infrastructure to best effect as well. Catamarans have also been designed for high sea state operations with higher bow, higher tunnel arrangements, and also visor arrangements to stop water flowing in. So catamarans can be built and have been built for these kind of sea conditions, including the outer isles operations, as we can see from the experience of Pentalina and which is a 60 metre vessel, and the Alfred, the new one, 98 metre. Just a couple of points here on reliability. It's often been said in the past, particularly by those advocating monohulls, that there's a question about the reliability of catamarans. But I think the Orkney experience with Pentland ferries has proved beyond doubt that the catamaran can hold its own in the roughest sea conditions of the Pentland Firth. And earlier on this year, there was several occasions and several days during the storms, Ciara and Dennis, when Pentland Ferries Alfred sailed, but the larger monohull did not sail. And research on this, which I've been involved in the past, has shown that the monohull suffers largely because of higher windage, higher deck area. So it suffers from the windage problem. The catamaran has a benefit in having 4 engines and 4 propellers, so is able to turn in a much more confined harbour area as well. So it tends to be a more reliable option. And it's not really the issue isn't sailing at sea that's necessarily the problem. It's berthing in port. And the catamaran is more than able to hold its own in berthing in any conditions the monohull has to contend with. So just to summarise this brief presentation, I think we're all pretty much agreed in the islands that Orkney's outdated ferries fleet needs replaced. It actually needed replaced many years ago, but it definitely needs replaced now. New ferries will obviously reduce the fleet repair and maintenance costs and downtime. The catamaran price in this analysis per car space is only 1/3 that of the monohull. So as someone who's done economic feasibility studies on catamarans around the world, including here in Orkney, I would highly recommend catamarans for operations throughout Scotland. And there are discussions now ongoing with Scottish Government to replace parts of the CalMac fleet with catamarans. CalMac and CMAL are resisting that, but I think increasingly ministers are well aware that the catamaran offers tremendous advantages. Catamarans also have 50% less operating costs per car space, and that's mainly by virtue of the fact that they have the same engine power, the same fuel consumption as a monohull, but they carry twice the load. So your emissions and your cost of fuel per car space is half. The catamarans can also double ferry capacity at reduced cost. Obviously, 50-metre boats with 50-car capacity and 35-metre boats with 35-car capacity will mean that the islands will always have plenty capacity, and people won't have to queue up and risk not getting on. The idea is really to provide plenty capacity so that the ferries can provide a good service to the island communities. Funding options, there's options here in respect to government's loans, long-term loans, lease, grants, joint funding, and probably the best option for Orkney is perhaps a joint funding option where Scottish Government and Orkney Islands Council come together and make some arrangement for fleet replacement. Obviously, with catamarans, they can get a fleet replacement for half the price of monohulls, so that should be attractive to Scottish Government. Whereas monohulls has been a big stumbling block, I think, for the last 10 years when OIC has gone to Edinburgh and tried to get the £100 million or so for a fleet replacement. If they can go to Edinburgh and say we can get this for considerably less, then that's a big advantage. Obviously, doubling vehicle capacity, car capacity on the ferries will also raise farebox revenues. So they'll be able to carry a lot more traffic in future, and that will raise the revenue potential. So it should reduce the annual subsidy costs, and that should also be a big advantage for OIC. New ships can be built in Scotland, but whether that's a big issue or not, I would question. It's better to maybe bring in the vessels wherever they're built, just as we would buy a car now or an aeroplane or a train from wherever. It doesn't really matter where it's built necessarily, as long as it's operated efficiently and can provide the required service. It's at the end of the day, it's the users of the service that are really important, and that's the island communities and the travel industry and freight. I think also in this context, global ferry industry management expertise is very important in ship procurement. It's not every day that that the public sector goes out and buys a ferry, and invariably the public sector buying ferries often over-specifies and makes things inordinately expensive, unnecessarily expensive, and that creates problems for communities. So I think there is a need here to bring in expertise to advise the council. Although I would say that, having been a former advisor to the Director of Harbours at one time, but I do think advice is very important, rather than just for public officials to go and order ferries, which is not something they're doing every day, and it takes quite a lot of expertise to make that the right decision. So that's really this presentation, and just to summarise the basic ship economics here, it's a function of payload, power and price, and in this context the catamaran provides the best solution, as we know from Pentland Ferries experience and many other operators around the world who have chosen medium speed catamarans. They provide very reliable service, they provide a great payload, low power and low price. Thank you very much.